Hey everybody, welcome back to the Men Need to Be Heard show. I'm Dan, and it's so good and so exciting to have you back. So today we're going to be talking about something that's very near and dear to my heart, which is the issues that men face with mental issues in society, and we don't say that in a negative way. What we want to do is try to bring awareness to them. One of my big pet peeves in life and in the world is that the issues that men face tend to get ignored and not treated for a wide variety of reasons. So that's what we're going to be discussing. And I've got someone that I've been following on TikTok for, I don't know, probably well over a year. Like me, she's had multiple accounts. You know how that is if you've ever followed us. So let me bring her on. I have Ms Fanny Adams. Did I say that right?
You sure did.
Oh, wait, I'm
Hello.
supposed to say Ms, aren't I?
That don't matter. Just Ms Fanny Adams is fine.
How are you?
Very good. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for teeing this up with our time zones. I very much appreciate it.
Yes, so she's over in another date, or well, she's across the pond. Is that how you say it?
Yeah, very much
That's
across the pond.
yeah. And I'm
Yeah.
actually I'm on the east coast of the U.S. and she's over in Aussie land. We'll go with that.
Mhm.
Which begs the question I have to ask:
Mhm.
Vegemite, why?
Oh, oh no.
I told you I would get a reaction out of you on that. I actually tried it
Vegemite.
once.
Oh, really?
I had
And
so I'm, almost 60. So for those of you who are under probably 50, probably have never heard the song Down Under.
Men at work.
You Men at Work, which is a great song, by the way, but they talk about having a Vegemite sandwich. So back, well, I think I came out in like the early 80s, somewhere in there. I tried a
Yep.
Vegemite sandwich because that's what we were all doing. That is the most disgusting thing I think I've ever eaten in my life. But apparently
No.
yeah, it's a delicacy over there, I've heard, though. Is that true?
Yes, but you've got to make it right. So I heard a very good thing the other day. A gentleman was talking about it, and he said that it's not a spread, it's basically a butter seasoning. So you
Oh,
essentially have like two-thirds butter with one-third Vegemite, and then real good spread on the sandwich or the toast, and then it's perfect. And that's a perfect explanation
I
for
will
Vegemite.
have to try that because I went full on Vegemite on bread. And
Oh no.
now,
No.
and I will tell you, I've eaten some really weird things in life. Back in the day, I would eat anything. It's right top three of the worst things I ever eat. But
Oh no, no, I could understand because I mean that's just pure salt and yeast what you
it
probably
was
just
this,
ate. But yeah.
yeah. But anyway, I thought it'd be fun to open the show with that because the younger viewers are going, "What the hell are they talking about?" Go check out Down Under, Men at Work. It's a really cool song. I'll leave it at that. So, Fanny, tell us a little bit about yourself and what it is you do.
Oh crikey. Okay, so I'm a nearly 40-year-old woman, married, three kids. Sounds very average. It is very average. I started my psychological journey in 2009. But basically, I have worked in advocacy, working for people who didn't have a voice from 2003. So I saw a lot of different things. I knew that that was the sphere I wanted to get into. I started studying psychology in 2009, 2010. I completed a degree in that by 2013, but by then I'd met my husband, and I basically put all my studying on the back burner to go and be with him and his three children in the UK. And just from being around him and being with him during what he experienced through his divorce and how the courts have treated him, how social services have treated him and his children, really woke me up to actually it's not just people who have, say, a mental or a physical disability. It's genuinely half of society are being ignored. Um, And I think obviously after COVID hit, we all became very chronically online, and I just saw this wave of hatred towards men that just really did not resonate with me. And I've basically gone back to studying. So I'm almost finished. So I'll get my provisional license in a couple of months. And thereafter, I'll be on a master's program. And hopefully, I'll either get an endorsement or I'll be a psychologist within the next 2 years. But I'll have my provisional license very shortly. So anything I talk about here is obviously my own opinion. I can't obviously signpost anyone. You know, I
Si-
can only give my opinion.
Signpost
You
is
know,
a term I haven't heard used before.
yeah.
That must be like a difference between the countries. Yeah, to be very clear to everyone, we're putting this out as a disclaimer. What we're talking about is our opinions. We are not diagnosing anything. We are not doing any of that. We're just sharing opinions, sharing thoughts, and what I would say to anyone watching or listening is if something we're saying hits home with you, strikes a chord, reach out and get professional help. Right? That's not what we're looking to do here. We're trying to raise awareness, but we are not giving you specific advice to you. That's way beyond definitely my scope, and certainly Fanny's also. But I have a feeling that a lot of this is going to strike chords with many of you, and if it does, this is one of the topics we're going to be talking about is don't be afraid to get help, right? Because the big issue that I've seen in my 6 decades now is that we tend to bottle it up. I'm as guilty of it as anyone, and that's the biggest mistake you can make. Trust me when I say that. So, any more you want to add to the disclaimer on that, Fanny?
Yeah, not really. Just that I obviously, like you said, I can't diagnose anything. And like I said, I don't yet hold a protected title here in Australia. So, I'm not out here claiming to be a psychologist when I'm not,
Right.
but I do have quite extensive. I've got several degrees in psychology, so it's not as though I'm daft to it. And I've just completed my thesis too, which centered around men, fathers
Really?
and parents. So yes.
Oh,
So
can we chat about that a bit? We hadn't really planned
yeah.
on it, but I think that's fascinating. So, tell us a little bit about the theses and your conclusions from it.
Okay, so as we know, there's a huge sway of help for mothers. So, for example, with postpartum depression, um, basically my thesis was delving into the social identity approach. So, the social identity approach posits that if you can hold on to group memberships, so say, for example, you were a football fan and you would go to see the local footy playing or something every week, but after a life transition, say into parenthood, you lose the connection to that social group. That can have a detrimental effect on your mental health. And obviously, that can lead into certain pathologies that obviously we want to try and avoid. So, a huge amount of research has been done on women because we obviously understand postpartum depression, we understand postpartum psychosis, but the information out there for men going into parenthood was scarce, scant at best. So obviously, I found a gap in the literature, but then I had to answer the question: well, are men really bothered about going through transition to parenthood? Um, so I kind of got met with some interesting feedback from people saying that men just generally don't care. You
Oh,
know,
that's not true.
they're yeah, their lives aren't affected, etc., etc. And yet, from talking to my husband, talking to other men that have gone through the transition, and finally really digging deep and finding some research, I found that 10% of men who transition to parenthood actually experience similar symptoms to postpartum depression as women do. Obviously, they don't have the hormonal component to it,
Mhm.
but they do feel a real shift in their social identity. So they're not just a man anymore or a worker anymore. They're a father, and they do very much undertake that role. And the literature that I was finding, although it was scarce, was all pretending to men do care. They very much care about their offspring. And what was affecting them was not necessarily depressive symptomatology. It was more that their quality of life felt like it was declining after parenthood. And that's
Interesting.
because,
Yeah.
yeah, so that was because during the pregnancy journey, um, I mean, I have all these references. If anyone wants, oh, I can just see now. Where's your references? Basically, 1/3 of parents felt that they were completely ignored. So 1/3 of fathers, sorry, felt that they were
Okay.
completely ignored during the pregnancy journey. No pregnancy journey. No one asked them how they were doing. No one asked them if they needed any support, because all of the focus is obviously on the mother
Hmm.
and her journey to obviously have children. All the literature out there, whether it's on social media, is all about how to be a good mum, or it's how to be a good parent. It's not necessarily specific to being a father. So the decline in quality of life for dads came in because they would often feel really burdened by, oh shit, now I've got a family, now I've got a mum, now I've got a partner who's a mum, now I've got children to look after. It's not just our little unit anymore. I have to keep going. I can't stop. It's this whole, their sense of even being a man has expanded. But then obviously, if they are feeling some type of depression or lack of quality of life, or something that is causing them to have some dissonance, they feel like less of a man. They feel emasculated almost, in a way. They feel like they're not doing their role effectively. So that's kind of where my thesis was coming from, because I wanted to try and find protection measures basically for fathers, because obviously there is nothing out there for them.
That's
um,
fascinating that you mentioned that, and I'm jumping in here because I have 5 children, and thinking back to when my first son was born, I can relate to everything you just said. Right? Um, it is, and I think I can speak for virtually every guy with this. It's very scary, right? It's like, oh shit, I'm now responsible for this baby that's coming along, and that is life altering. We're raised to be providers, to take care of things. There's that level, but then when you have a child or children, there's a whole other layer and level to it. And it's very scary, and guys don't want to talk about it. Right? We don't talk about it. And then one of the things I was thinking of while you were talking about your whole thing, which is fast. I could do a whole show on just your theses. Maybe we'll have to down the road. But the other thing is, the literature that was out there, mind you, this was in the 80s for me. Maybe it's changed. I don't know. But it was always one book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. That became the Bible. But if you read it as a man, it's like none of what they're talking about in there applies to me,
no.
And so back in the day, I did go. I'm that type of person. If there's something I don't understand, I go research the hell out of it. There was not much to research. There was no literature other than that book, pretty much, which was directed towards women. And I'm not knocking that. That's what the book was written for, right? But it does speak to how men feel neglected. It is changing in that way. Everybody wants to ask her how she's doing, and I'm okay with that. I'm not knocking that. But
No.
I've been through, well, it was 6 pregnancies, because we did, my first wife and I lost one at about 7 months. But through all those pregnancies, I think once in all of that time was I ever asked, "Hey, are you doing all right?" And
Mm-hmm.
uh, some of it, for the most part, I'm not saying it was bad, but for some of times I was like really struggling and nobody cared. So I kind of felt, I should say, exactly what you're talking about with your theses. Now, how was I know I sidetracked you a little bit, but how was it, or is it, being received?
So I actually got really incredible feedback from my institution. They labeled it as one of the first that of its kind that had been written. So the reason why my thesis was special in a way, or good in a way, was because I didn't look at men and women comparatively. I looked at them individually as, both are very important. I didn't want to draw a comparison between men and women, because I knew the narrative that would come from that. It
Mm-hmm.
would be like, well, it's whataboutism, isn't it, on either side?
Mm-hmm.
Women go through this, and you can't compare men and women anyway, because one of them carries the baby and the other one doesn't, right? So it just didn't seem very common sense to do that. So I actually did it sounds very technical, but it's not really. I basically did a moderated regression analysis, which looked at, so on this side of the fence, I had social identity. So your identity as a person before you entered parenthood and afterward. And then I had how that relates to your psychological health, but the gender moderated those relationships. So if you think about a triangle, basically. And I just ran that twice, basically, just for men and women. And yeah, so the results were, this is interesting though, this is going to sound a bit random, but the results for both were insignificant. So that means that neither men nor women in my study felt that there was anything wrong, or there was no interaction between social identity and parenthood, and gender didn't moderate that relationship. So it basically means that the support structures that we have in place for women are either working and they're doing great. It either means that men don't really need support, or what I actually think is that the study did not reach enough people to be able to have the effect that I wanted it to have.
Interesting.
Yeah, so by the time I did all my analysis, I literally just met the threshold for power, what we call power. So I need enough people to be able to generalize my results to a larger population. Okay, so if my sample is quite small, that reduces the power of my analysis. So although I literally just met the threshold, and I'm talking about by one, yeah, it doesn't mean that the results were really interesting, and that's why I got really good results from for my marks and everything. And my thesis in general is really, well tooting my own horn, it's quite good.
Yep.
But yeah, I think with a larger portion of population, it would have been a lot better. But that's kind of feeding into the fact that the reach was quite difficult because men don't respond
That's.
to research.
I was just gonna say, did you have a problem getting men to open up about it? I had this underlying feeling, and I guess I was right. And kind of not to segue, but there we go. I mean, that was right down the middle of the plate here. And by the way, I definitely want to read your theses if I can at some point, because that stuff fascinates me. I'm weird that way. I like to read stuff like that. But it's one of the things that I have found in all the stuff that I've dealt with and studied and all that, is that there is a lack of understanding of what men are going through, and I blame men for it. And I know a lot of people listening to this are going, what did he just say?
Yeah,
If we don't open up, if we don't make ourselves available to, for example, a researcher like Fanny or whatever, they can't help us. That's one of the things that I am quite passionate about. It's one of the reasons I do this podcast, is so that we can get what we're thinking, feeling, and out there, so that we can get people help. And you spoke directly to it, and that's why I'm like, oh yeah, she's speaking to me right now, because
yes.
go ahead.
Yeah. No. I was just going to jump in and just say, so when I was basically formulating my proposal, because I have to put it towards an ethic board, obviously. So it passed all that, great. And then we put it up on a cloud research site, which was originally Turk Prime, but it's cloud research now. But my supervisor at the time, she said, you need to be very aware that we don't have the funding to push it to where we know the men are probably going to respond.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the problem. So, we have the problem that, yes, like you're saying, that men don't, respond into it. But then we also have the problem that it's just not funded. And there's just no space in which we can pull that information from. So, for example, if we're looking at postpartum depression in women, we can take a lot of data from clinical samples, because women are engaging with medical institutions, and we can take the information from there. Sorry, my dog is currently trying to
All good.
get up in me. But you see, because men don't engage with medical interventions and all the rest of it, we don't have that sample to pull from straight
Hmm.
away. So that's what we're talking about when we can't reach and get the funding out there, if you know what I mean. So it's kind of frustrating. But yes, I absolutely agree with you. On the other hand, I don't necessarily um, blame men, I guess, but kind of right. And I've said that before, and I even said when I was doing my research, I actually put a shout out on my channel on TikTok, and I said I cannot help you if you don't help me,
There you go.
and that's exactly it.
Yep.
Just I mean, my study was good because the sample that I had left over was pretty good. It was kind of like 60-40 split in terms of men and women. So that was really good. But generally speaking, we see 70-80% of the research literature focused around Caucasian women.
Wow.
And that has a huge implication on not just men, obviously, but like women of different color and you know,
Exactly. Yeah. That's.
all these different things. So white women, calm down a little bit.
Oh, you
Maybe
just
leave
stirred the
some
pot
room
with
for some
that
other
one.
yeah, maybe leave some room for some other people. But no, any data is rich data at the end of the day.
Right.
We can't really say don't apply, but yeah, it can be frustrating on my side of the fence when I am trying to answer questions and I just can't do it. So instead, what I've done recently is I've taken because I used to be very much into stats in terms of I relied on them to tell the story.
Hmm.
But having spent a year on TikTok, and I mean, the reason why I went viral in the first place was just a very random in my bedroom talking about the patriarchy and how I don't think it exists in the West, and it just went bang,
Oh,
and all of a sudden these men are talking to me about all their experiences, and this is why I now see statistics as part of the story. But my husband's story is nowhere in a statistic,
hmm.
and I've been on so many forums. I follow the fathers' rights and all the rest of it. There's 700,000 men there who don't belong to a statistic, for example. So I just think I need to listen more, and that tends to infuriate a lot of people because they just demand a statistic,
Yeah.
and it's like, well, the evidence is speaking for itself. You just got to listen.
Well, one of my
And
contentions is that I tend to put it more towards women, but in general, they listen to men, but they don't hear what they're saying. Right.
yes.
And so it becomes very polarizing because and I had it happen yesterday. All right. I put a post up talking essentially about how men and women view sex differently, right?
Mhm.
Sex is intertwined with intimacy for men much more than it is for women, and
Yes.
that's not,
Yes.
neither side is wrong. It's not meant to be, one's better than the other. It's just is. And I had to actually, it's funny because I use Instagram, I use TikTok, and I use YouTube. They didn't even push the video because I they don't like that. But Instagram, it actually went viral, and I actually started having to delete comments because the women were getting really upset about it. They didn't hear what I was saying, or they heard what I was saying, but didn't really listen to it. Didn't take the time to go, well, wait a minute. He's saying something here. Maybe there's a point of discussion, which was my whole goal with it. But and I know you deal with that a lot on some of your posts, and it does
Yeah.
speak to how it's like, well, where's the facts? What's this, cite me your statistics. And I'm like, Google's the thing. Go find it yourself, although
Yeah.
using Google's a mistake too, because Google's going to give you what it thinks you want to hear, not what it actually is
Exactly.
going
Exactly.
on. But it's just kind of interesting along those lines. You and I think a lot alike. I don't know if that's good or bad.
That's a good thing. I
Yeah, I
think we're
guess.
I think we're actually more common sense. I call myself a common sense connoisseur. I'm not exactly radical in my way of thinking. I think that everyone is valid. I think that everyone has a space in the world, and I think you're very similar. But speaking about things that have gone viral, I put up a post the other day talking about so the Pew Research Center recently released a article saying that 63% of young men, so between the ages of 19 to 25, I think it was, or 19 to 29, are single. And I
Hmm.
spoke on my opinion of that because the experts say that inappropriate adult content online is the problem. And I
Well
said, no,
put.
it's thank you. I'm thinking to myself, oh, let's not
We
go
got to
there.
edit that one. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
sorry. So no, but I'm thinking it's not because the experts aren't listening to men in general. They're not listening to the social narrative because I think what happens with some experts is that they get very bogged down in doing all the research and reading all the papers and
Hmm.
being all about statistics, and that's great, but it's not answering all the question though, is it? So I just said, look, these are my opinions on it, and it's got 6,000 likes so far in like a day, I think it was, which is good for me. And then every single man down the comment, oh my god, she gets it, where have you got
Yep.
your information from? And I'm like, I just listen to men.
Well, it's
And this is
funny because I was going to bring up that video
oh, are
because
you?
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely I was because my reaction was exactly what you just said, right? It's like, and I knew that, and I know you get it, right? But it was like, whoa, she hit a home run on this one, and
Oh,
it brings up a point too that you mentioned, which is, and I see the same thing on some of my videos. You put up a video and you'll see, in some cases, thousands of men going, "Yep, that's right. Wow, I get." From in my case, it's like he's speaking for us. You hear, she gets it, and then you see the women coming on there, and I want them. I'm like, and they'll say, "You're dead wrong. Men
yeah,
don't feel that way," and I'm like,
yeah.
okay, your one comment is outweighed by 10,000 in some cases, men saying the opposite. Why don't you
Mm.
step back and hear or listen to what they're saying? And maybe your viewpoint might change. I'm trying to be polite also here. But that it's, how it is, I'm sure. But it just, again, that video, actually, I thought you hit a home run on that one. And I'm not saying that because you're here with me and all that. But it really did, you know, I talk a lot about men being single, and I advise men. I'm at the point now where it's like, be careful. I'm not saying don't get married or anything like that, but go into it with your eyes open.
Mhm.
Stop being blind to the fact that there's about a 50-50 chance at best
Mhm.
that you're going to have a successful marriage, and if you don't, you're screwed.
Yeah.
And make your decision knowing that, as opposed to going in with blinders on. But to go back to what you were talking about, I think men, especially the younger ones, are at the point where they're just done, right? They are waking up. My generation, again, I'm almost 60. We were idiots. I'll say it, right? I believed in the rom com fantasy. You're going to get married. It's going to be great. And then, I talked about this with David on the show a couple weeks ago. David Bizarra, he's a divorce attorney. I'm like, the first time I walked into family court, oh, I still, to this day, But
Mm.
I think the younger generation, which is, I don't know, is it Gen Z? I don't know. I can't keep the generation
I don't know
straight.
where. Yeah, I think it's Lindsay.
But the men are not getting involved in relationships. They are, I think you even mentioned it in your video, they're happier playing video games, and focusing on themselves. And as someone who has tried to raise awareness and been through the trenches, I'm actually excited by that. Um, there's a lot of negative social implications to that, let's be honest.
Yeah.
Birth rates are plummeting. I think in some way that's part of the reason why they're plummeting.
Yeah.
But it speaks to, for lack of a better term, men waking up, um,
Yeah.
and realizing that what are the benefits to being in a relationship, and when you look at it as a man, we look at it as risk versus reward, and women in general really don't get that. So what's the potential reward? I could have a very happy marriage. I'll have, two kids, the standard thing. I'll be happy, blah, blah, blah. Yes, that's a possibility, but there's
Mm.
also the possibility you're going to be living in a one-bedroom apartment, with no furniture, trying to figure out food and seeing your kids 4 days a month. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so, uh, with that video, I kind of talk about a little bit about the reactions you saw and how you think that the men, I don't know how I want to phrase this, the men that are responding to that video, obviously they're she gets it, right? You mentioned that, but
Yeah.
using your expertise with that, how would you interpret that to say it's not about corn? Is that the way we're supposed to say
Mhm.
it?
Yeah.
um, it's really more about the differences in the way men are thinking these days.
Yeah, so this kind of touches into what I spoke about with the National Centre for Men too in a podcast I did with them recently. Um, on the one hand, I very much understand it and I get it, and I support why young men, especially, aren't getting involved and they aren't having the relationships. But then on the other, I'm desperately sad about it too,
Mm-hmm.
because I just think that, we're so much stronger together. And I think that inherently, I have a belief in me, whether it's because I'm female brained and all the rest of it, that, you know, people do want to find a connection and they do want to be with other people. But when I've listened to young men, so what I'm seeing is two sides. So I'm seeing an older generation of men telling the younger generation, this is what's going to happen. Be aware. The younger
Me.
generation are listening to that. No, and that's fine
Yeah,
because
that's
that's
what
your
exactly what I
opinion,
tell
right?
them.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so the younger generation are listening to that, but then they're also listening to this rhetoric in society at the moment, which is all men are bad, they're useless unless they're earning, six figure salaries. They're nothing. They're probably living in their mother's basement still. Blah 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 blah. And we've completely emasculated men. We've completely dehumanized them. And now boys, young men are thinking, well, why should I even bother? And now we're seeing them dropping out of school.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're seeing them have like no care basically for entering into relationships. So they might go for a hookup, for example, but they're
Right.
not exactly looking for a committed relationship. And a lot of them aren't even going for hookup culture either. I mean that the percentage of them is quite comparable to women, really. It's not exactly hugely different, but it's not exactly out there in terms of they're actually looking for it, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me like they just don't want to try, and I don't blame them because of everything they've been told, or they just don't feel like they've got enough to offer the world. And then it's just, like I said, it's that the women have to be held accountable for part of the problem because they're saying that men aren't good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so what do we do with that? And I find it desperately sad. So I'm seeing all the comments roll in. I had, so many hundreds of comments rolling in. And originally I was like, oh, yay, I've got it right because I've listened to people and they're resonating. And then a day went by and I'm thinking, it's actually quite sad because now where are we going to learn what
Mm-hmm.
is a good relationship and what is a bad relationship? How are we going to know what I call it the price of admission to a relationship is? Like, how do we know what is going to be our boundary if we haven't, tried and tested the water? But young guys just do not want to do it.
No, they
They
don't.
just don't want to do it.
Yeah, it's funny because you and I agree completely, which probably doesn't make for good podcasting. But the fact of the matter is, they aren't doing it. Again, it goes back to that risk versus reward. Men tend to think that way. They may not realize it, they may not admit it, but that is, and the risks simply are too great for the potential reward. And
Yeah.
I do think it has serious implications on society. I completely agree with you that this is not good, right?
No.
Human beings are meant to be in, to use dog terms, a pack, right? We're supposed to be talking to each other, around each other. And part of that is, a man and a woman together, the sum is, or the whole is much greater than either one individually.
Yeah.
And we both have strengths, we both have weaknesses, and we tend to offset those weaknesses and build on those strengths when we come together.
Mm.
A good relationship benefits everyone, not just
Mm.
the two individuals, but society, the children, all of that. And it does speak to where we're at. I don't know what the future is going to bring with that. I think the pendulum started swinging back in the 70s. Feminism came in. And by the way, and I've talked about this before, it needed to start,
Yeah.
right?
It did.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It did. There's no question of that.
Mm.
And I would fight anyone that says it didn't.
Mm.
That said, as tends to happen, the pendulum went way too far to the other side. And
Yes.
so now, and I want to kind of get into some of this stuff, what it's triggered is issues for men dealing with, being bombarded from the day they're born, told they're, frankly worthless. They do nothing. They provide nothing. And it creates that issue where men just withdraw and
Yeah.
and leave society, if you will. And I think it kind of leads to, and this is one of the things I wanted to kind of talk about, was the struggles that men are facing, like just at a high level. What do you think are the biggest struggles, mental health wise? I'm not sure that's a great way to put it, that men are facing in today's society.
Oh, the biggest. I'm not entirely sure because men keep so much close to them.
Fair point.
But I think this whole rhetoric that men, it's a double standard. Okay, so women are saying you have to speak about your feelings, you have to be vulnerable, you have to have emotional intelligence. But as soon as a man starts speaking, oh my god, you're just a misogynist, oh my god, I can't believe what's coming out of your mouth, yada yada yada. It's like you have to be doing this, but when you do it you're wrong. And but for millennia we women have literally been sitting around and talking about our feelings, whether it's at home, and then obviously later on through modern technology we've been on radio, TV, all the daytime shows are geared towards women because we're the ones at home, right? So we've been talking for a long time. And now with the rise of the podcast and the rest of it, we now see anti-rhetoric against men with podcasts too. It's like, oh great, another guy with a podcast. So it's hard to determine what specifically I would say from a mental health perspective would be difficult. But I would say, from my own opinion, it would be that they can't speak up in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
They can't express outrage because it's just seen as some kind of oh, toxic masculinity. I've had a conversation with my husband about this, and the fact that I have spoken to, say, the National Centre for Men and other places as well, and they all say the same thing. Why do you get to speak about our outrage and people listen,
Yep.
but we can't?
It's funny
And I
you say that, because I put myself out there, right? I do
said,
speak, and I get slammed. There isn't a day, there isn't an hour that goes by I don't get slammed. It doesn't bother me, right? But I've also been banned, right? I've had 4 TikTok accounts banned. I've had a YouTube channel banned, just simply for speaking out on issues. And, you know, do I have a bias? I'd be lying to say that I don't have at least some bias, right? But I think in general, I try and hear both sides and express the views of both sides.
mm-hmm.
I don't hate women, not by any stretch, although they instantly label me as that because I dare to
Of course I
speak
do.
out. So I totally get where you're coming from. And honestly, as a man, there's very few of us that can just let it roll off of us. And those of us that can, the guys tend to, I mean, I get messages all the time from guys, thank you for speaking out, keep going and all that. And my problem is I try and encourage them to speak out, because
Yeah.
strength in numbers. And again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. They just will not open up. But
Mm-hmm.
having been through the trenches for almost 30 years now, I totally understand where you're coming from with that. It is. And I do think it, do you think that'll ever change? Do you think that society, I'm not going to say women, but society in general, will allow men to open up at some point and start listening? I do think so, but I think not in my lifetime. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's going to happen, and I think the silver lining to this whole young men aren't dating scenario is that older men, say 30 plus, are dating, but they're still getting divorced. So they're still so there's still women out there who are with men who are older, who are maybe becoming stepmothers, who are going through the same thing that I went through. Women are waking up, but women, hate to say it, ladies, but we're extremely egocentric, and it doesn't matter to us until it happens to us. So I think, generally speaking, because women are the ones that are dating, they are going to see men going through certain things and be like, oh, okay, it's starting to make a little bit of sense. You do get some women who are very much, every single one of my exes is a narcissist. And those are the women that are just kind of lost in the field at the moment. But I think there is a small shift coming. I mean, there's so many women out there who are recognizing of men's issues, and it is growing. It is a growing field. And but I find it interesting that the only women that clap back at me, are underaged 25. That's
Really?
the only, yep. I've been paying very close attention to it, especially on TikTok. And the only women that clap back and say the usual feminist rhetoric, which is it's the patriarchy, it's the pink tax, it's the wage gap, it's the this, it's the that, all under 25. All
Interesting.
under 25. Anyone over that, they can be spoken to, discoursed with to a degree. And it's more a case of, oh, well, this is my experience. And I said, okay, but this is my experience.
Interesting.
So, so they can be discoursed with, and they generally don't have hate for men in their hearts. They've probably just been burned by inappropriate relationships, maybe, and they just are choosing to be separate. And then you just do have the very radical feminists, which I think are a really tiny minority, even though I do understand that on social media we think that it's all women, or we think that it's this huge number. I do think it's actually quite a small number of radical women who are pushing this narrative onto the younger women that all men are bad. But it just so happens that women between the ages of, say, 18 to 25 are lapping it up. I think they're also being indoctrinated a little bit in schools. I've seen that myself in my own
Bingo.
study.
Yep.
Yep. Yes, and I've pushed back against that too. I've actually walked out of classes before, and I've spoken to the dean of my university a couple of times about things that have been inappropriate like that. So I do think that is where it is, and I do think it's going to get better. I think I think the pendulum is slowly coming back, and I'm not going to try and get too political, but women are also seeing a bit more of a common ground too, because their identity in terms of woman is kind of being crushed at the moment too.
Oh, that's a whole other podcast, and by the way, I completely agree with you.
I'm not going to open that can of worms,
right,
but
right.
I'm just saying that I think that women are actually coming together now and listening to each other more. That's just my take on it. But yeah, under 25s.
See, now I find that interesting because I would have thought it was the exact opposite.
Interesting.
So now I'm going to pay attention to that, because I think, and again, I have not really looked into it. This is just general perception on my part. I think the older ones tend to be more negative and the younger ones more open. That said, there are that contingent out there of the younger ones that have been indoctrinated. They're very easy to spot. And it is, to your point, a very, very small percentage. I honestly think, hey, puppy, I would put it at somewhere like 3 to 5% at most, in my opinion. It's that small. The problem is they're a very vocal minority.
Very vocal.
Very vocal. And no offense to women, but women don't stand up to them and say, you're starting to see it more, but they tend to, again, this speaks to how men and women think differently. Women like the group mentality. Everyone's got to get along. We all come to an agreement. Guy will go, I'm going to go do this. If you don't like it, too effing bad, right? Yep. Women are like, nope, we all got to feel good about this. And again, I'm not knocking anyone. There's benefits to both. Yeah. But when someone like yourself and some of the big ones on TikTok, Laura and Emily and those, they get savaged by women. Lynn is another. And they get savaged, and it's just interesting to see how that happens, because then the same women that are savaging them are also the ones going, we got to come together, we got to stand strong, you go girl. It's just an interesting dynamic. One of the things I wanted to kind of talk with you about is the struggles that men have as far as mental health. Things like depression, anxiety. Anxiety is a
Mhm.
big one, and I don't think that one's discussed much. But it leads to things like substance abuse, homelessness, and unfortunately, and this is a statistic I heard yesterday. I don't know if you probably haven't heard it because it was local to the States, but about 20 men a day who are veterans are unaliving themselves on a given day.
Yeah,
And then
yeah,
you add on top of that others. And I kind of want to get into that a little bit and get your thoughts on, how do we fix that? Is it fixable, I guess, at this point? Because one of the things I want to do, especially with having you on, is raise awareness about these issues, talk a little bit about them in general. We can't get specific. But what are your thoughts on that?
yeah. Again, it comes down to with anyone that's in crisis, we always say the hardest part of the journey is speaking up, asking for
Very
help.
true. Yep.
We know that men are not very good at doing that, but also in the same hand, there's no support structures out there ready for them to listen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've said it before in a video here at my local health hub, there were something like 16 numbers on the wall. 11 of them were for women, and then four of them were for LGBT spaces, and then one was for a man. But then that shared spaces with women who were LGBT. So they had like no space to go to. I think the economic crisis at the moment is playing a huge issue with everyone, but especially men, because they are still believing that they are the providers as well. I think men need to be more. Um, I don't know. Maybe men need to kind of shoulder to shoulder with one another more, check in with each other more. Because
Yep.
uh, I find that doesn't happen either. My husband is one of the most stoic men that I've ever met. My dad is the same, but they've suffered in their own ways. And, it's only until the very end when they've exploded or, you know, they're pushed to the brink that you realize something is wrong. And men should not feel that they have to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
Men should feel like they can go to their GP and, well, their health professional and be heard or be referred to somewhere that will help. But frustratingly for me, in the mental health sphere, and like what I've said before to my husband, I said, "Do you think that therapy works?" And he said, "No." Nah.
I agree with him, by the way.
Yeah. So, and a lot of the reason for that is because during my training as well, and like I touched on earlier, the people that respond to research, so in terms of how we put interventions in place or, how we can structure modalities and all the rest of it, the people that respond to that are women.
Mm-hmm.
So, how can we possibly put training in place which is appropriate for men? And then obviously some other therapies aren't looked at in a positive light. So, for example, I know some individuals have gone and paid for literally just a woman for a girlfriend experience where they'll just sit with them and just listen to them talk. But they don't want a therapist because a therapist is going to interrupt them and try and fix them. They don't want to be fixed. They just want to get it off their chest. And
Mm-hmm.
then that's it.
Gee,
There's all
who
these
else
different.
says that, Fanny? Who else says I just want to be listened to? Don't try and fix my problem. Women. Interesting how
Right.
we're different, but yet not so different, are we?
No, we're not. And this is the frustrating thing. It's so frustrating because inherently, and obviously, what works for one person is not going to work for everyone because we're not
Obviously,
monolithic beings.
right?
Obviously, I know a lot of men that have really responded to psychotherapy or psychology, psychiatry, what have you. But in terms of you mentioned say the unaliving rates or high risk taking behaviors, the a lot of these have um, predispositions like generational trauma. We see a lot of that coming down too. I'm not trying to cause blame anywhere, but I think the rise of single parent households plays into that. I think the whole economy plays into that. I think how we're treating men plays into it. So I think it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Mm-hmm.
But I think people now speaking about it is people like myself and, some of the big hitters on social media. I'm only teeny tiny, really, but it's just the more it gets talked about and the more that men feel like women are listening, I think that's slowly going to pull the narrative back around. But yeah, men need to say, I need help. But in the same hand, we need spaces for them to go to,
And that,
and we need someone to listen.
yeah, that's exactly why I'm doing this podcast, is to make this a space where we can, my goal is to have experts like you come on, so that, because I think men respond to hearing someone like yourself talking about that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of raise the awareness that, look, we're human beings, first of all. It's okay to have feelings, because we're told from the minute we're born, tamp them down, right? Suck it up, man up, shut up. That's, I mean, I grew up hearing that. You know,
Mm.
I was not allowed to cry or have feelings. And to this day, it still happens, in society. But I also do think it's changing. I'm starting to see, I think social media, as bad as it is for all its negatives, has some good, because people like yourself, myself, we're getting out there and talking. And I think, one of the things I'm working on, and I'm not trying to plug anything, but I'm starting a Patreon because I want to create a group. And the reason I'm using Patreon is to put a paywall on it, because I want to
Mm.
keep out people that aren't going to be involved and willing to speak up. And, oh, by the way, keep the rad femmes out too, right?
Yeah.
But to
Yeah.
create that safe space for men to talk about. And I think, and I'm going to be blatantly sexist here, it needs to be men leading the charge on this, because as much as I hear everything you're saying and love everything you're saying, but to the average guy, they hear from women all the time how they're supposed to think, and it's
Yes.
almost always negative. For
Mm.
guys to stand up, we don't say that. We need to start saying that it's okay to have feelings. It's
Mhm.
okay to be depressed. It's
Mhm.
okay to need to reach out for help.
Mhm.
You kind of talked about that. I back in the '90s, when I was going through my divorce, I became depressed. And that'd be a whole scenario, again, a whole other podcast. But in short, I sought therapy,
Mhm.
and I hated it. I don't feel it worked at all. And my take on it was, and I saw both men and women. I shopped around, so to speak. I never made that connection with any of them.
No.
I just couldn't find it. And, looking back at it now, some 20 odd years later, I think, and I don't know how to put this the right way, but I think it was because their stigma towards men, their bias, is so ingrained that
Yeah.
they come at therapy towards men from that perspective, that men are bad.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm saying that the right way. Can you kind of maybe fix me on that?
No. So I'm going to say something that's probably probably going to get me a bit of backlash, but I think that what um, therapy or mental health is trying to do, and in the social sphere, is, like I said earlier, trying to emasculate men, trying to feminize men. You've got to have all this emotional intelligence. You've got to be calm. You've got to talk about your feelings. That's fine. But I would say, what's wrong with leaning into your masculinity?
Mm-hmm.
What's wrong with being pragmatic and getting angry at it? Like, buy yourself a punching bag, go to the gym, like, find a running group, like, do something that is, leaning into your masculinity, like, I think a lot of the problem is that women, and I said this earlier, we have the ability to be outraged. We have the ability to make mistakes because society will forgive us because we're women, because we are, basically entitled to that. Men need to know that they can speak, that they can be outraged, they can be angry, they can be masculine, they can make mistakes, and it's going to be okay. And that's not what we have at the moment. We have, and I hate to bring it up, but if, as long as a man shows some form of anger or masculine trait, or, he's intimidating, he's, aggressive, he's, it just becomes these things.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, he needs to vent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think maybe therapy doesn't work, because obviously sometimes a man needs to just shout, get it out, you know. I say that men should lean into their masculinity more and not be feminized to the point where they just don't recognize themselves, because I genuinely believe that men can lean into their masculinity and still learn the emotional intelligence that's required to be a decent human being. I think that men in general are incredibly decent human beings. I'm not talking about good guys or all the rest of it that people are
Mhm.
talking about out there. But I don't think that trying to take men and fit them into a feminine role set is ever going to work. It's
It
just not going to work.
it's not going to work. This is one of my things. We agree on everything. This is like we're supposed to be disagreeing, but anyway. But it kind of
Oh, we
speaks
can
to.
find something to
But
disagree on.
here's a perfect example of how we're having a discussion, an open discussion, and we're finding that we agree on many things, right?
Yeah.
That's lost in society. It's, if you're either one side or the other, there is no middle ground. Yet here you and I are. Now, admittedly, we have the same beliefs, I guess, but it does speak to how when you have a discussion and you can express yourself, you're talking about anger in men. I've experienced it. There are times where I've been just infuriated, and now my fix is to go to the gym. All right.
Mhm.
My real job is I own a gym, a fitness studio, and I'm a trainer. Okay, that's what I do for real.
Mhm.
So to me, that's my therapy, and it's what I try and teach my male clients, and by the way, my female clients, right?
Mhm.
Because it allows me to get it out. Exactly what you were
Yep.
saying. Um, I know guys that have done things like boxing. You mentioned that. Getting out and just punching a bag can help you get through things. I do, however, think that therapy in general is completely failing men. I think I can't speak to now because again, my experience was 20 odd years ago, but having talked with guys, it's I would argue, and maybe I'm wrong, and that's where I'm looking for your input. I think it's worse now. I think the colleges, universities have gone so far. Again, I'm not trying to talk politics, but they've gone so far to that side, the left side, if you will, where women can do anything. If a woman gets out and screams bloody murder, you go, girl, you speak up, fight the
Yeah.
patriarchy. If a guy goes, geez, that kind of upsets me, he's labeled as, the worst thing in history. And I think inevitably that is going to come into play. I don't care where you're at, but if you're surrounded by that thought process, that belief system for a university, 4, 5, 6 years, depending on what level you go to, it inevitably will come into play. And I do think it is affecting therapy because therapists are human beings. I'm going to say
Yeah.
that, and they inherently have biases. And again, I'm not saying that as a negative, it's just the reality. And I do think that comes into play where, and I'll be honest with you, I think it's worse with male therapists than female. I
That's
honest,
interesting.
I honestly believe, and I said the same thing, by the way, about family court judges. I think female family court judges are much more open and less biased than male judges are. And I
That's
catch I
interesting.
catch flack for that, but I have experienced it.
Ah, okay.
So I kind of think that things will change and get better, but I also do think that one of the struggles that men have with opening up is you got to have that trust level with a therapist. And I talked about my experience. Uh, do you agree with me? Do you think that there's those biases, and is it changing, or am I completely off base?
No, you're not off base. I don't know whether I don't know, because I mean I haven't been in this sphere that long to
Hmm.
know whether it has changed, but from my own learning, so like I mentioned earlier, I started my learning in 2009, 2010, and it was very much a equal space. It was very, if we didn't have the knowledge there about one gender or the other, it was just okay. Well, we were taught. a lot of the medical history is based around men, because obviously they were the ones that were in science for God knows how long, and yada yada yada. And that was it. That was just the recognition. And then on the other side of the fence, it was like, but we know from psychological studies that women report more, and yada yada yada.
Hmm.
And that was it. That was it in terms of the debate, in terms, for gender. And then I've come back. So I started restudying again in 2020, at an institution that literally I sat in front of a lecturer who would introduce himself as a cis heterosexual and white male. And I instantly just went, and he and another one, a female, um, yeah, I'll just leave it there, was trying to teach us about the pay gap. Now, bearing in mind I'm studying psychology, I don't really understand why I need to be told that there's a pay gap. And they presented it in a way, and this is why I love and revile statistics, because they presented it in a way which made it graphically look like the information that they were presenting was factual. But I just raised my little hand and I said, I don't think this is right. There's no information here as to, when they left college and when they're entering, the workforce, how long has someone been working, what's the choices of family care. And I asked all the questions and I just basically got told to shush.
Yep.
And I was not happy about that. So now we've got all of that being introduced into the psychology sphere, which is not good. And then also the political landscape seems to have come into it too. So now a lot of the learning is about, and quite rightly too, but around the marginalized communities and all the rest of it, which is really, really good. But when I say things like, I was learning about grief and sorrow, and one of the topics that came up was disenfranchised grief. Okay.
Hmm.
And instantly, when I heard that term, and what I learned from the term was, disenfranchised grief is basically a grief that you feel, or a mourning something that society doesn't feel like you should mourn. And I raised my hand and I said, well, could that be like parental alienation then, when you're mourning the loss of a child that is still alive, but obviously you don't have a connection to anymore, which predominantly happens to fathers? Instantly shut down.
Ugh.
Instantly shut down. No, that's not disenfranchised grief. That's just, and it's like, well, that's exactly what the learning was.
Yep.
That's exactly what disenfranchised grief is, but you're telling me that I can't talk about it. And like I said, when I was talking about my thesis, my supervisor was really open to me doing it. She's been incredible. My team that I did it with are incredible. But when I bring up issues about men in my live discussions and live supervisions, and this will harken back to what I said earlier, the people that are nodding along are the mature students like me.
Hmm.
And the people who start sitting cross-armed like this are the women under 25. There has to be a reason for it. There has to be a reason for it. So yes, the indoctrination, I think, is real. I think it can be surface level. I think it's worse now that we have universities that are pushing gender studies. I think that's caused a massive divide too. There's a bit of contention in the psychological sphere about social psychology too, because obviously that's creating a divide. There's a lot of psychologists or would-be researchers out there who are very biased and pushing an agenda,
Hmm.
based on what side of the fence that they're on. And it's just not good. Instead of coming from a position where we are all human and we are all equal, and like we said earlier, where a man covers a woman's weakness and vice versa, it's now just become, who can wear the biggest medal in the Victim Olympics?
Great way to
And
put
that's
it. Yeah, that's fantastic way to put it. And it speaks to, I think the vision's going to get worse before it gets better, because it is being driven, whether you say it's a political agenda, which that's my belief also, or I'll blanket it as a societal agenda. I think one of the things that comes out of that is, when a man goes to seek therapy, and let's use parental alienation, since that's one that I have experienced that, right?
mm,
And I have always said I would rather my child had died than to have them
Wow.
still alive and not speak to me. And I have a child that does not speak to me and hasn't for 20 odd years. That
Mm.
is far more painful to me than if he had died. And it's
Mm.
horrible to think that way, I think, right? But that's my reality, and I think that's a fair statement to make, having talked with other men in the same situation. And oh, by the way, women who are on the back end of parental alienation say the same thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you go into a university and they dismiss it like they did with you,
Yeah.
and then let's say I go and reach out to a mental health professional and say, here's what I'm going through, can you help me? And they go, I mean, I'll be weird with it or blunt with it. You have nothing to be, why are you worried about it, essentially, right?
Yeah.
Because they've been
Well,
told in
what did you
class,
do?
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, or it's twisted against you.
Yeah. What did
Um,
you do? Why did your kid not talk
yeah,
to you? What could you have done better?
yep. And you
That
sit
that
there,
would be the rhetoric. Mm.
and I've experienced that. So yeah, it's, and I hear it even now. Well, why isn't he talking to you? And you try and explain it, and again, we could do like 10 podcasts. But it does, again, it speaks to what that causes men to shut down, right? So in my case, I
Yes.
went to seek help. Um, I'm not anti-therapy per se. I actually think there's a lot of good that can come out of it, but it'll be a cold day in hell before I'll go see a therapist again.
Mm.
So
No, I don't blame you.
do
I
as
don't
I
blame you.
say, not as I do. you
Yeah.
know, um, and it's because of my experience. And again, I guarantee you there are good therapists out there. Finding them is the problem. Which kind of, if you don't mind, let's jump into that a little bit. So, as in general terms, but more specifically as men, how would you suggest seeking out a mental health professional? Is there something we can do? I honestly don't know of anything, so I thought maybe that might be a good thing to ask.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know how it works in America, but I know in the UK and Australia, you can actually look at your local directories for practicing psychologists, counselors, etc., in your area. If it and funding is going to be the next thing that you've got to consider. So, do you have the funds to be able to see someone? Can you get in Australia, UK, you can get plans that will help pay for these sessions. Try, if you can, find someone with a protected title. So you're looking for psychologist, psychiatrist, generally, I think in America as well, the term counselor is not a protected title. Literally anyone can call themselves a counselor, I think, in some ways. These people might have done some training, but just to give you an overview, I've done, you know, 6 years of psychological learning so far, and I'm still not doing placements in terms of face-to-face clients. It's all theoretical knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Psychiatry is obviously the same because they do an MD first. So try and find your local directory of professionals in your area, and they should tell you what they specialize in. If you don't get that and you're just literally ringing around people, ask what they specialize in to see if they've got reviews, obviously, and don't be afraid to try going to see them. You've mentioned before about whether you clicked with someone.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen many therapists in my time, and I've probably clicked with two, and that was it. And I'm very open to therapy. I'm very much a therapy person, obviously, being a psychologist. Um, don't be afraid to, like you said, shop around, try
Mm-hmm.
different people, but don't be afraid in a therapeutic situation to be combated against either. Sometimes their treatment plans are there to get you to challenge your mindset. So you have to go in with a open mind that these people are here to help you feel better, and that's going to uncover a lot of uncomfortable things. But if you come out feeling worse, or you come out feeling like it's definitely not going to go anywhere, don't stick it out, chop and change,
Mm-hmm.
go somewhere else, basically. But yeah, try and stick with a protected title, try and get what their specializations are, give it a go. And yeah, that's all I can suggest, really.
Yeah, one of the things that I think is interesting about what you said is the difference between the countries. I think, UK, Australia, most countries. I have again. I don't want to get into the whole healthcare debate, free healthcare and all that. In the U.S., generally, you can, if you have an insurance plan, you can get at least some sessions with a therapist. I know back in the day, I got 6 free ones.
Yeah.
So it is out there, and I will tell you, having interviewed people, there is free help out there. You just have to find it and reach out. They don't make it easy sometimes.
No.
But like I was interviewing for someone on the radio show that I do the other day, we were talking about local senior center, and they have clinicians. They call them clinicians. There specifically to work with people over 60 who are having mental health issues. So, and it's completely free.
Oh,
So,
that's good.
to anyone, I would say you've got to go looking.
Yeah. You have to.
And I agree with you that, look at the reviews, talk to someone else. And one of the things I hope to do long term is kind of not build a database, but be able to say, have a place where guys can come in and say, I met with so and so therapist. This was great, or it sucked. But again, that's so subjective because I may connect with you, but not someone else, and that someone else may be fantastic, and the one I connected with may suck. Right? You don't know. The most important part, I think, is the connection. But again, I never achieved that. So it was, I always came out of it. You kind of said it, feeling worse. Like, I don't mind the question, like, how does that make you feel? Oh God, I hate that question.
It's a bit standard.
But I also understand why they do it, right? I mean, I get what the reason is behind it, but I don't mind those. I don't mind probing in, right? I was going because my marriage had fallen apart. I was SA'd for 2 years by a woman. I had to deal with all of that. That affected my marriage, even though I didn't know it. It wasn't until I got to be about 40 years old that I got all that behind me. And I'll never say that it's completely behind me. That's never going to happen. But for the most part, it is, right? But it was interesting, the therapist would probe, and I'm okay with that part, but then they would almost blame me. That's kind of how I felt. It's your fault. They never directly said it, but I came out of it thinking, it's your fault you got SA'd. What? No. And that's, or it's, they would say, well, your wife left you. What did you do?
Yeah.
Dude, I didn't do anything. I walked in the house and the house was empty. I was like, that just, anyway, I could go on and on about that. I don't want to make it about me. If you don't mind, I want to just kind of shift the discussion briefly because I know we've been on for a while and it's late for you. But one of the things that I wanted to get your opinion on as an expert, that it's a theory of mine. So one of the issues that no doubt you've heard about, it's a big issue here in the States, is the pew pew in the schools. How's that for putting it, right?
Yeah.
And the only solution that's put out there is take away the guns. That's it. That's all you'll ever hear in the media. It's all you'll ever hear people talk about. Setting that aside, I don't even want to go there. I think it speaks to the lack of understanding of the true problem, which I believe triggers it. No pun intended. My theory is that most of the pew pew in schools is at least indirectly, if not directly, caused by boys being told from the day they're born that there's something wrong with them, that they are less. That's the term I like to use. All right. Or, the whole educational system is geared towards females right now. It's not geared towards helping boys learn. And I think what ends up happening, when you hear that from the time you're born and you go into kindergarten all the way through, normally if you look at, because I've studied this, it happens the late teens, the 17, 18. That's the age group, 19. That's the age group that tends to do it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is one, the schools, but two, the way society portrays men as bumbling idiots, as, you know, again, inferior, if you want to use that, whatever terms you want to use. I think you kind of understand what I'm saying. I just want to get your opinion on that because I think until that is acknowledged, first of all, and then addressed, I don't think it's going to change. What do you think?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but I think if it's purely a case of always being told something negative, then we would see more of that happening, but we're not. I feel personally, because I'm an outsider looking in, so
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what your current landscape is socially or what's on your media. Um, it has to be a perfect storm for someone to pick up a firearm and enter a school and do that. So if we're talking about the kids that do it specifically, I would say there would have to be some form of parental conflict involved. There'd have to be maybe a hereditary or a predisposition to violence or some kind of
Interesting.
negative psychopathology. There would have to be bullying, probably as a component, probably someone who's either I would say probably lacking in academia and doesn't have the support of staff. And then, you've got the very easy access to the weaponry
Mm-hmm.
too. I feel like and obviously the social component of boys always being told XYZ, but I think if it was purely just a situation where boys are told that they're not good enough, that we would see this being more violent than it is. And
Interesting.
I guess you could argue that yes, there's the incels, but you know, they're extremely rare. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but we are seeing boys dropping out of academia. We are seeing that boys aren't trying as hard. We are seeing that they're not entering into relationships as we were talking about before. But I think it's a perfect storm of other factors as well, like a massive constellation of antecedents, which actually brings a child to that point of this is what I've got to do. And you've got to maybe think about why they're doing it too. Do they want to be famous in some way? Do they want the infamy of it? Because let's be honest, they go down in history, don't they? Some of them
Absolutely.
that
Yep.
you know this is my way of getting noticed finally. You're looking for the child that is very solitary, you're looking for the kid that doesn't communicate very well. And like I said, and I hate to bring it up again, but are they from single parent households? Is there a lack of a mother or a father component there? Is there generational trauma in terms of drugs and alcohol? Like I said, it has to be a perfect storm. From what I can gather from what I've read of previous um, perpetrators of such violence, it has been a combination of factors
Mm-hmm.
um, that are like that. But yeah, if I don't see, maybe we're disagreeing now. I don't necessarily agree that it's just the case of the social atmosphere doing this to boys, which is
Yeah.
making them do that.
Maybe I misled you. I think it's part of it, not all of it. So
Yeah.
I have started doing extensive research on this. And by the way,
Mm.
you hit the nail on the head. So
Oh,
in not all cases, again, people gravitate to if it's not all, it's not true, right? But the
yes.
majority, the overwhelming majority of cases, they come from single mother homes. There's
Yeah.
been abuse of some sort. And when I say some sort, I don't necessarily mean in the home. It could be bullying. You mentioned that. It, everything you just mentioned comes into play. It really
Yeah.
does. And they feel, for lack of a better term, ostracized from society. Within their society is the school, obviously.
Yeah.
They feel ostracized, and it is their way of being noticed, is my opinion, right? Like you talked about fame. I don't know that, again, I'm speculating here, and you have far more expertise on this than I do, but it's their way of saying, here I am, for lack of a better term. As horrible, by the way, as that is. I'm not trying to make
No,
light
no.
of any
But
of that, but it's like,
mm,
I am a human being. I mean, when you get to that level, there is a host of issues going on. You completely agree with you on that. but I do also think that it's in some way, and I've worked in K-12, I've seen what goes on. It's the othering, if you will, of boys.
Mm.
You're going to sit at your desk, you're going to shut up, and you're going to learn. That works for girls. I mean, there's
Yeah.
studies that have been done. It does not work for boys.
No.
You know, they take away things like recess. They take away gym, right? Which I understand why, because I've been involved in that, but it doesn't work for boys that way. They need to get their energy out. So when you plant
Mm.
them in a chair day after day for 12 years and you other
Yeah.
them and you tell them constantly, there's something wrong with you, or they see, in the news, men are this, or social media, when we kind of talk, you and I see it every day. I mean, it takes a lot of strength to be able to take that and not respond. And
Oh yeah.
I think I do it better than most, and I fail at it. I'm going to be honest with you, right? So
Mm.
I agree with you, and I love having your perspective as an outsider, not in the U.S., because I think what we need to do in the U.S. is reach out to people like you to get
Yeah.
that perspective, because here it's political, it's gun control or Second Amendment.
Yeah.
However, and I'm
Mhm.
not taking a position either way. I have a very strong position. I'm not going there here. That is part of it, but it
Mm.
doesn't address the underlying cause,
Mhm.
in my opinion. And I do think a lot of it is mental health in some
Mm.
form. And like you touched on, if you're getting bullied every day and you're gonna act out, you're gonna get
Yeah.
angry. And we don't
Yeah.
give boys in particular, because it's not, girls don't do it. There are
Mm.
instances of it, but it's something like 90, high 90% boys,
Yeah.
single mother homes, not single
Mm.
father, by the way,
No.
single mother homes.
Mhm.
And again, I'm not blaming mothers. I think it's more
No.
a case of it's just the way it evolves.
Yeah.
They've been disenfranchised. They do struggle academically. In some cases, from the research I've done, it's not, the schools aren't addressing them. So, like my oldest son, for example, did horrible in school because they didn't let him learn. Right? He was one of those They put him on Ritalin, for example, or tried to. I fought it tooth and nail, as opposed
Yeah.
to
Good.
saying, "Geez, because he actually is extremely intelligent, but
Mm.
they never taught him, so to speak."
Mhm.
So that's one way. The other side of it is sometimes, yeah, academically they just don't do well. It's just interesting to hear your perspective on it, and I don't know that we disagree. It's maybe different levels of it, but I
Yeah. No. No, I think another thing I was just thinking of too would be, teachers have a very difficult job when it comes to teaching, but I wonder whether they should have some level of specialist training in mental health, or at least understanding some signs. From what I can gather, school counselors can, be a counselor without a proper accreditation. I might be wrong.
so they can
Not
be social workers in a lot of cases. So there's
right.
social work is different than, say, a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
Yeah, yeah. Don't get me started. Yeah, I not had the best of time with social workers. I think social workers go into it and they want to do a great job, but then just get caught up in bureaucracy. But again, that's an aside.
Yep.
They're not trained in mental health to the
Mm-hmm.
degree that I think is needed in schools. So I think if we had a protection barrier, so we've got teachers that are trained to a degree in mental health and can know signs that kid is solitary over there, there's something not quite right, this one's appearing disheveled, or this one's like up and down one day. I can go to my counselor who's accredited and all the rest of it and have a conversation and maybe try and get this individual some help. What happens, I think, is that teachers are so overwhelmed with classrooms of kids which are either too high in number, or kids that are either disenfranchised themselves because they're coming from poor areas and low socioeconomic areas, or they just don't have very good training themselves,
Mm-hmm.
and then just kids slip through the cracks and they go unnoticed, and then this happens. And I've spoken to a few friend well mutuals, I would say, from TikTok who say that the weak men are what we should fear up and coming through, young men.
Hmm.
And I understand what they're saying there, because they're saying that young men are becoming more and more angry. And unfortunately, we know that men will take the violent option because they
Yeah.
are inherently more violent than, you know, physically violent than women. So yes, I do understand that perspective, but I just feel like we need to have more of a frontline barrier for mental health for children in schools, and it's just not there.
It is criminally lacking, in my opinion.
Mhm. Yeah.
Teachers don't get any training on it. And what training they do get, honestly, because I've been through it, I don't think is very good. Um, and again, they're teachers. They're not trained to be mental health professionals. I get
No,
that.
no, no.
But the other side of it is, yeah, when you look at who is in the schools that is trained, it's the social workers, and that, again, I'm not in any way knocking social workers. I think most of them, as you said, come at it from a place of good. They want to help people,
Yeah.
but they're not trained, and it's not their fault. I'm not faulting them.
No.
It's just a whole subject. We could go 5 hours on it, but it's interesting to get a perspective of someone who's not in the United States, but
Yeah.
has the expertise you do, because it isn't going to change anytime soon. I don't think. I think it's going to get far worse, to be honest with you, because it's
Mhm.
the underlying issues are being completely ignored, and
Yeah.
it kind of speaks to, in general in society, that if we don't start addressing male issues with mental health, men's issues, things are only going to get worse, not better. It's you're touching on a lot of stuff, and it's just hitting home with me because you're again, we agree on a lot of things. We might say them differently, but uh, one of the things that I think needs to really be done is at the political level. And again, I don't want to get too much into politics, but I deal with politicians not every day, but every week. They don't see there's an issue. They
No, but they wouldn't. They're stuck in their bubble, though, aren't they?
they see it as a female issue. Oh, women need help
Yeah.
for that. Men don't. Men just need to suck it up. They're stuck in the 1950s, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
What do you think society in general could do to help boys, men cope better? I guess is the word I'll use.
Mm. Well, I'm not going to advocate for anyone staying in a relationship that is not going to be healthy for them, but I think we need to empower. It's all very well having highly educated women, but I think we need to empower women to understand that marriage is not the goal of a relationship, it's the start of a relationship. And then we also need to empower men to know that they can be hands-on dads and hands-on parents. And I think we need to educate each other on how to maintain healthy relationships, which will then have a knock-on effect on our children, who will basically grow up with positively adaptive parents, rather than this split home shift, going to this house or that house, or alienated from a parent, or living in poverty, yada yada yada. That's what I think inherently we need to go towards. We need to have children that are being raised in very supportive structures, whether that's a, whatever kind of diet that presents itself as. That's on a very overarching level.
Mm-hmm.
On the next level, we need to stop this rhetoric of um, men versus women. Um, we need to stop that. And that's kind of what all my content is about. It's about, recognizing that we are equal, and, try and follow the logic all the way through,
Mm-hmm.
try and understand that we're all human. You can't hate men and be raising a boy at the same time, because he's gonna hear it, or it's gonna rub off on him, or you can't do that. So I think women need to, you know come down and recognize that men are men and
Mm-hmm.
women are women, and we are completely different. We've got both strengths and weaknesses, like you said. And then I think from a um, medical field, we need to definitely put these intervention structures in place. Men need to be like I said earlier, speaking up and, taking part in research and, creating these safe spaces online. I'm part of several discords, for example, of um, men who come together and just chat about things. I've been very fortunate to be invited to those safe spaces. And it's just a general sense of respect, really, and understanding, which I think is completely lost at the moment. Everyone seems to be very egocentric,
Hmm.
narcissistic almost to a degree. And yeah, while that continues, I heard a really good thing the other day, which was saying that the social sphere will eventually play out into the political sphere later on. So what we're seeing now, and I do feel like the pendulum is swinging back a little bit. People are starting to bring common sense back into it a little bit more. And my hope is that in the next, say, 5, 10 years, we are going to see that in the political landscape too. But we just have to hold on.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's the hard part, is right. We holding on is the. I agree with you. By the way, it is politics tends to run a few years behind society.
Yes.
So as society is changing, and I think that's part of the problem right now is because of that lag, that time gap with all that's going on in the world, politics haven't caught up. Politicians
Nope.
in specific, and I talk to them all the time. Most of them
Mm.
are idiots, to be honest with you. They are. It's they
But they're not
politicians,
online though.
huh?
They're not online though. They're not
No, they have
listening
no
to
idea.
general
Oh,
people. No.
what people don't realize about politicians is they think people in general think like if they post something on social media that they're reading all the responses. Number one, they're not the ones posting; they have aides doing it. Number two,
Yeah.
they never read any of it. They have never seen a single post. And I'm talking the higher level politicians, local ones, maybe your town council or something might. But
Yeah.
yeah, they have no idea. So they have a total disconnect. And when I
Yeah.
talk to them about men's issues and specifically men's mental health or domestic violence, because
Mm.
back in the day, I tried to get a shelter open for men. I got nowhere. I wanted $100,000 from the state of New York. I had other people that were going to back us, but we
Mm.
needed that initial funding because
Yeah.
other people that wanted to back us wanted to know that we were going to have support from the government. Got nowhere. They shut me down completely. There's only
Yeah.
two shelters in the entire United States for men, and it kind of speaks to that whole thing with society in general. Politicians lag
Mm.
behind society, and I agree with you. I think change is happening. My favorite phrase is, "It's happening like a snail trying to get through a pile of peanut butter with a 50-pound anchor dragging behind it." It's just, but
Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
moving forward. And I do think that people like yourself, and yeah, myself, I'll give myself a shameless plug, are helping to raise awareness.
Yeah.
I love what you put out. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on, is because you're not coming at it to attack men, or excuse me, women. You're not
No.
in any way, shape, or form. They view it that way,
Yeah.
but you are coming from, hey, I'm trying to help everyone here. It is. We are human beings. We all have our pluses and minuses, both as individuals, as in gender, all of that. And the only way I feel to fix it, and I think you're kind of saying that, is we got to learn how to communicate with each other.
Yeah.
Women think differently than men.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing,
No.
actually.
Yeah.
Men are more, I call it linear. I hate to use the term logical because that just raises ire, but men
No, but
are,
it's true.
but it is true. But if you use it that way, they get mad. But if you say it's linear, men go from A to B to C to D. Women go
Yeah.
from A to X back to C over to G. And, it's why, it's, we all joke about it. Men can't understand women. No, we can't.
No.
We have no idea
No.
what the hell you're thinking, and you guys don't know what you're thinking half the time.
No, that's absolutely true. And I think this is why I get frustrated with some of the big female creators that speak against men on TikTok, for example, because they all come out with like these hypothetical situations that just aren't happening, or they are what I call relationship Barnum statements. So it's just a blanket statement which could be applied to anyone, but they're using it against men.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see in the comments, women are just going, "Oh yeah, this is my life," and it's just. But I'm sure that's the guy's life on the other side of the fence too. It's just this is empowering no one. This is educating no one. Everyone has the right to vent, right? I understand that, and everyone has the right to say what they want to say and create the content that they want. But I come from a point of view where it's just I do not want to attack anyone, but I also need to call it out when I see it.
Mm-hmm.
I can't let it go. There's just something in me where it's just you have to follow the logic all the way through, or just don't say it. You
Right.
know, it just you can't have it always. Um, you could, and this is what I said earlier. You can't say that men are the biggest problem in life and still be married to one and be a boy mum.
Mm-hmm.
It makes no sense to me. No sense to me whatsoever. And then the other argument that I see is that, oh, we just need to raise boys to be better. And I actually spoke back to someone the other day and I said, well, isn't that what women have been trying to do for
For
like
50
since
years.
the time? Yeah, like are you saying that every single mum has got it wrong, but you might be the right one?
Uh-huh.
No, like that's it does wind me up, but I can but again, anything that just has makes me have a visceral reaction, I try and sit on it and reflect on it, and I listen and I listen and I listen again.
Yeah.
Sometimes some people get the better of me, and I do have a say back.
And I do
But
love
then
when you do that, by the way. I,
I know,
I look forward to those sometimes because I know you do what I do sometimes. Sometimes we do feed the trolls just because it's fun, right?
you got to have a bit of a
But it
release.
also allows us to educate, right? I do the same thing as you,
Yeah,
right? But I come at it, and I know you do. It's not to hurt the other person; it's to educate.
no,
And you're not going to educate the troll; they're so set in their ways. You're not changing them. But if I can get a discourse going, and I did it yesterday, I knew the she was coming at me, and I was going right back at her. And I'm sure she thought I hate all women and I'm angry and blah, blah, blah. No, my goal was to educate people and say, see what she's saying, see what I'm saying. Take from it
yeah,
what you will, right?
yeah,
You might think I'm an idiot. You might think she's an idiot. Who cares? But at
yeah.
least there's a way of educating people that way and bringing awareness to how we think differently, issues,
Yeah.
whatever. And I know you do. That's where you're coming from too, because I see it. It's just we need more of us. I guess is where I'm going with it.
I think we just need common sense to come back, and I think it is coming back slowly and
Slowly,
surely.
yeah.
I think this whole, and Chris Rock said it beautifully with his Netflix special recently,
Oh, I
selective
watched that.
outrage.
Yes.
Yeah, we just need to stop with the victim Olympics, stop with the selective outrage, treat each other as equals and as humans. Like where did this whole treat each other based on the content of character go from? Where did that go? All of a sudden we're just, you know, oh, you're a man, well, I hate you straight away, or oh, you're a woman, I hate you straight away. Oh, you've got blue hair, I hate you straight away. Why can't we just see each other as equals and
Mm-hmm.
go from there first and treat people based on how they treat you?
Could not have said it better myself. And that's my philosophy in life. I don't care what color your hair is or whether you have any even. Um, it's how you treat other people, how you treat me will
Hmm.
determine what I think of you. And I think if we all kind of came from that perspective, things would be a lot better. We
Yeah.
have talked for an well over an hour and a half. I knew this was going to happen, and we could go another hour and a half. But you've got to get to bed, I'm sure, and
Easy.
I have other
Yeah.
things to do. Fanny, let's wrap up with any other final thoughts that you have, and also could you tell people how to follow you? Because one of the things I think anyone watching this needs to do is go follow her because she's amazing, and I'm not saying that because she's sitting in front of me on the screen. So, final thoughts and how to follow you.
Yeah, so I would just say to anyone out there, men especially, please start talking. Even if you don't believe that anyone's listening, or even if you're we have a saying here, even if your voice shakes, you need to speak up anyway. So that's something that you need to start talking about, because slowly and surely people are going to start listening. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have maybe something that's not quite right in your thinking. But until you start talking about it, you aren't going to know whether that's right or whether that's wrong. Reach out to people, just check in with your friends. Just takes a small text or a message. You okay? Check in. But yeah, if you want to follow me for some more common sense connoisseurness,
I love it.
you can you can catch me on TikTok under Ms Fanny Adams. So that's MS Fanny Adams or Miss FA.
And I will
That's where
put
I'm.
links down in the show notes for that, if that's okay with you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
hopefully
Thank
they
you.
can click on it and just get to you. Fanny, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, we could have gone another 5 hours easily.
Easy,
Easily. And down the road,
easy.
I hope we can have you back on again, because
Yes,
I
please.
would love to keep diving into these things. I love your perspective, and I love your content. And I'm not saying that because she's in front of me. Guys and girls, by the way, go follow her. Go listen to what she's saying, because she's speaking from the heart, first of all, and it's genuine. And I truly believe that. I wouldn't have her on if I did not believe that. I'm not going to have panderers on, so to speak. There are some
No.
huge creators out there that I could boost this podcast overnight with if I had them on. I won't have them on because I believe they're pandering. They're trying to get money, make an income, and I'm not faulting. Hell, go ahead, make your. But
Yeah,
they're not really trying to help men. You are,
no,
right?
definitely.
And
Yeah,
it's, I think you know kind of some of the ones I'm talking about. I can tell by the smile on
yeah,
your face. But
yeah.
thank you again for coming on. I'm going to
Very
go ahead
welcome.
and wrap things up here and say, if you've watched this far in, you need to like it, right? Give me a like, share this, and I'm imploring you to share this. One of the things I want to do is expand this podcast because I want to help guys. I want to help women too, by the way, so that we understand each other better. The more that we can get this out there, the more people will start talking, communicating, and learning about each other. That's really the goal behind this. So share it, like it, and hey, subscribe to the channel, because I've got some amazing guests coming up. I'm not going to tip my hand yet, but I've got some really good things coming, and we're just going to keep expanding on it. I'm going to have experts like Fanny on, because I don't know everything. I hate to break it to you. And a lot of times I'm wrong on some things, and I'm okay with that, because I always want to learn. I come from a place of constantly wanting to learn, because I don't know everything. And some of the things I may believe might be wrong. And I love having people explain that to me, politely, of course. All right, till next time, you guys have an awesome day, and we'll see you next week on Men Need to Be Heard.